stage, if you look at this industry overall, and you pick maybe one of the main products that that industry produces, like for example, beer, or if you know it's like in a mature stage now, if you think of what would it look like if it was only in the growth stage, you'd have less competitors, less suppliers, and but now it's possible if this industry has grown over time over the last 2 decades. Is it possible now that you're seeing many more suppliers that are being that are supplying the main manufacturers? You might have and so for a particular and then you'd have, it's possible as well in a particular industry that not one manufacturer relies on like their one production. Like now you'd see that one major you've got several major producers of various products, but they feed into the main, say, wholesalers who then feed off to the retailers. So you see the number of players increase over time, whether they're suppliers or manufacturing units. And they'll increase possibly not just say nationally, but like globally as well. We'll see more presence of these various players on a larger geographical scale. And so then also, you could also think about the change in the industry. Looking at the major group of products, if you see televisions, for example, like so that you could maybe consider this as a subsector of the electronics industry. So if we think about what televisions used to look like 20 years ago, it was I think it was an analog or something. Now the digital, and they rely on very different technologies now when they produce TVs. The components are much different than they were before. And so the sort of supplies that used to feed into the industry 10 years ago would be very different. Now you have, and also then in the manufacturing processes, the processes themselves also require a very different innovations as well. So that industry has also changed very dramatically over time. So just think about your industry over time. So the first question is looking at the industry as a whole. The second question is looking at how your industry has evolved over time. Yeah. The third question is looking, it says, what is happening in this industry sector with respect to green operations, supply chains, sustainability, triple bottom line, reverse logistics, and closed supply chains? Yes, Rohit, I saw your hand raised.
I was considering doing the automotive industry. Do you think that's a good idea?
Yes, sure. I don't know. I mean, of course, you could do it on a global scale. You could specify whether you're looking only at the automotive industry in, say, the US. I think the Australian automotive industry is probably pretty much dead. Not much is happening here. But you can focus on even the Japanese automotive industry. So,
okay, picking a different country and choosing that particular industry. Like I can take India as the market.
Yeah, I mean, like, are you saying India is the market for Japanese produced cars? Is that?
No. Like, I'm talking about the automotive industry, like how it's operating in one particular country. Like,
just make that clear when you're writing it in your
because like when you were addressing the third question about how it's green and it's changing continuously. So I was thinking about how they're going from like petrol and diesel cars to completely like Tesla, like what Tesla's doing.
So what that is you're basically using a market as an example to illustrate your argument. So that's fine, you can do that. I mean, that's a very straightforward question. The way to find the answers to this question for your industry is maybe pick a few of the major companies in your industry, and most of the time they'll have some sort of corporate social responsibility part of the menu or item there on their website, and they will talk about the sort of initiatives they're involved in for greener production or greener initiatives and what they're doing. They'll always be, if they're involved in something to do with recycling or sustainability, they'll always be trying to promote that or let the customer or consumer be aware of what they're involved in. So you can always find that sort of information online about that. And don't just look at the larger players, also pick a few of the smaller players, because like we said in the last tutorial, I think that often when it comes to even emerging technologies, your larger companies are slow to bring change. Sometimes it's your smaller startups that are bringing in new ways of doing things, so they're more flexible and agile, and they're able to implement newer, say, sustainable procedures or operations into their supply chains.
Can we do a comparison that way? If you're saying we can pick up like a top player and something like a smaller player in that particular industry, so for the SWOT analysis and the best analysis, can we do like a comparison between two companies to show how this particular company?
Would pest? Pest would be more at the industry level, right? So how?
SWOT. I meant to say SWOT.
SWOT. Okay,
Yeah.
SWOT. Yeah. Yeah, you could do like for the smaller players a SWOT analysis and see how they do, how the environment is or the industry compared to, say, for one of the larger players.
Because like how Kiran rightly mentioned that if she's taking the beer industry as a whole, like it would be significantly hard to do a SWOT analysis. But if she's picking Heineken and a competing brand, so if I do the same with the automotive industry, then I think like forming the entire SWOT analysis will become easier because it contributes to the overall industry, right?
Yeah.
So will that make sense?
Yeah. Or you could do the analysis where you show where the smaller players sit. But yeah, you can. I mean, it's up to you. Just be mindful of the word count. So if you are going to have these diagrams, then you need to be able to explain them. So you need to explain it in your main text, and you can include that in your main text. But if you're doing, say, something supplementary where you're comparing it with a different type or something, a company that's, say, not typical of the industry or something, you can put that in the appendix, let's say. So just think about how you structure it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
No worries. Just because we've got about 11 minutes left, we've got 3 more questions. So, what support is provided by governments to individual organizations and the industry sector as a whole? What industry development programs are on offer? And what impact are these having on supply chains specifically? So you're asking the question, how can government impact supply chains? Anybody want to raise their hand and just suggest how government can impact supply chains, different industry supply chains?
I can comment on the beer industry because of the general public awareness about alcohol consumption, and because of the NGOs promoting, about the safety aspects, and the problems with alcohol consumption.
Yeah.
The government is taking advantage of that and trying to, incorporate export taxes, import taxes, and heavy taxes on the beer industry, which is, that is a very big loss for the whole industry. I think, is that the context we're talking here?
Yeah. So governments can have that sort of impact on the organizations and supply chain, and that will impact, what's delivered to the consumer and how it's delivered to the consumer in terms of, marketing, what's allowed to be seen on the, in terms of packaging as well, like what they're allowed to put on, and how they're allowed to promote the product as well. And so, governments can also provide individual organizations with support by providing grants and funding for certain activities. So often the larger companies might not make use of it. The smaller companies often make use of the grants for things like we mentioned last time, implementing emerging technologies, like new technological solutions they need for their operations. If you need to find out exactly which government sectors might actually be having an impact on your industry supply chain, what you could do is think about your industry and then think what ministry might sit above or what ministry would have an impact on your industry by setting regulations and policies or laws that impact your industry? What's required? What are kind of the legal constraints that impact your industry? If it's pharmaceuticals, it's obviously going to be it's going to be things to do with safety of your pharmaceuticals. So if it's food, there's obviously standards set for health and safety of foods, and the same thing like with all sorts. There's always some regulation that products are bound by. So think about what ministry might be responsible for setting regulations that impact your industry, and then you can.
This question, can you just quote examples of because the developing countries might have different regulations from the developed countries. Can you just quote examples like Africa is having this particular regulation so that we try to cover the whole industry?
Yeah, exactly. Examples always, illustrating your point. So if you have a range of points to make, then just have a few examples, one of each that can illustrate that. You can go to the websites for these ministries or these government departments. So, like for example, here, if we're talking about the freight industry, transport and logistics, not just at a federal level, here at a Victorian state level, you have Freight Victoria, which is responsible for setting regulations on freight, movement of freight from Victorian ports. So they ultimately have an impact on most supply chains as well, because logistics is a big part. But just think about these sort of departments at the state and national level that could impact your supply chain. I'll move on to the next question, question 5, that is asking about industry associations, and it's saying what's their main focus, especially related to supply chain development. And this is respect to selected industries. So don't just identify the industry associations. Please make sure you, when addressing this question, that you see what they're involved in when it comes to supply chain development. Go and find out that you can even Google it. Like many industries, whether it's clothing industry, they have associations. All sorts of industries have associations at the national level, state level, even global level. And what it does is they, have forums. They provide their members with information about what's happening, what's available to them in terms of products and services. They often, so what do they do to help the industry to improve their supply chain? So are they providing education to their members, like giving them awareness? Are they helping to facilitate partnerships in the industry or partnerships with service providers from outside the industry? Are they helping to their members to get greater access to government funding? So you can identify with a few and from their websites find out how they're helping the industry. And then explain how is this having an impact on the supply chain. If they're educating them about something, how is this impacting the supply chain? Question 6 is saying for your selected industry sector, what linkages exist between business, industry, government associations, and universities, especially related to supply chain. So think about where you'd have some sort of collaboration maybe between universities and industry and government. So you can do a bit of searching to find out, but often if you look in the news section of larger websites, they might give you a bit of a clue to what they're involved in. Sometimes they're involved in forums where, they're getting companies together, government representatives are there. It's a whole, let's say, an opportunity for people from, or representatives from all these different groups to come together to work on solutions. So when it comes to supply chains, they're all giving their inputs to develop a solution to a certain problem. You could maybe go through the website, the university's websites. But one example is here in Victoria at Monash University, there's the Global Value Chains Research Group. And so we host regular workshops and forums where we get industry experts, so people involved in the industries, and then we get government representatives and other representatives from other associations and even from other universities. And this big think tank. So the last one was about global food chains. So looking at creating sustainability along food value chains, looking how like we're talking about emerging technologies, how they can be improving the sustainability of supply chains, specifically for the food industry. And some of the examples where GS1 was there. They were talking about tracing or keeping track of the temperature of certain food, or I think specifically it was meat or cheese, when it was being moved from an overseas supplier to Australia, to make sure that it's kept at the right temperature to maintain that quality. So there's lots of ways in which all these entities work together to try and improve or come up with solutions to improve supply chains. So remember, we're looking at improving quality in supply chains, improving sustainability, improving efficiency, and where you see those sort of initiatives taking place, there'll always be not just the organizations involved, they'll be bringing somebody else into the picture to work with, to get to work on these problems and come up with solutions. What else am I thinking that we need to do? When it comes to structuring, if you do an essay, that's fine, but maybe it's a good idea to kind of split these questions up. So I was thinking like these questions 4, 5, 6 are kind of related. So you could use maybe subheadings for these and just make sure you address them all. I think this one is more related to sustainability. This could probably be addressed on its own. And these two could probably come together under smaller subheadings and have one larger heading here, like industry overview. So you can kind of think about the way you structure this. I may give it some references or resources here for you to look at for these analyses. And word count, I think he said that it would be 3,000, not including the appendices, but I think references will be included. Yes, references will be included, because I remember somebody just asked about that. So, I know it's hard, but what it does is it makes you, you need to be concise and to the point, and probably the best thing to do is try and split up all the questions from all the smaller questions from each of these large ones, and make sure you put them in dot points, make sure you address each of them, and then put it together in your larger structure and see where you can elaborate without going overboard, and make sure you answer the questions first. So yeah, I think this gives you a little bit of now an idea of how to address these questions, and I hope you can think about your industry sector and how you want to address these questions. So next week maybe we can have a go at approaching some of the questions, or you can